"Don't marry that dirty old man," shouted a little girl as a 91-year-old millionaire's father was marrying a luscious 21-year-old. Then she reveals something shocking. Comment giving a score from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The sound of the bells echoed through the luxurious chapel when the main door burst open. The 4-year-old girl burst through the central aisle, her bare feet leaving muddy marks on the red carpet that had cost a fortune. Her torn and dirty dress contrasted brutally with the opulence of the environment, where imported flowers decorated every corner and crystal chandeliers illuminated shocked faces. "You can't marry her!" shouted the child, her high-pitched voice cutting through the sacred silence. "I won't let you." At the altar, the 91-year-old patriarch almost dropped the gold cane he was holding. His trembling hands tightened around the ornate handle as he watched the little figure walking determinedly towards him. The 21-year-old bride, radiant in her dress that cost more than many people earn in years, frowned her perfectly defined eyebrows, her mouth agape in complete disbelief. The 30-year-old widowed millionaire sitting in the front row rose instinctively. His impeccable appearance, tailor-made Italian suit, perfectly combed hair, a watch worth more than luxury cars, could not hide the confusion that took over his blue eyes. He had built a business empire based on control and predictability, but nothing had prepared him for that moment. The girl stopped in front of the altar, trembling not only with nervousness, but with hunger and cold. Her sunken cheeks betrayed months of deprivation, and her eyes, too big for her small face, shone with a determination that seemed impossible for someone so young. In her dirty hand, she held a yellowed envelope that made the elderly groom take a step back. "Who is this child?" whispered the ambitious college student, who had abandoned her business studies when she realized that conquering that fortune would be more profitable than any diploma. Her melodious voice, trained to enchant rich men, now carried a note of poorly disguised panic. The girl extended the envelope with hands that trembled visibly. "He's been lying to you," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I know because I saw it. I see it every day." The patriarch looked at the envelope as if it were a poisonous snake. Decades building his reputation, accumulating wealth through stock investments and businesses that generated millions in dividends, and now a ragged child threatened to destroy everything in a matter of minutes. "Get this girl out of here," he murmured to his son, but his voice came out weaker than he intended. The millionaire approached slowly, each step echoing in the tense silence of the chapel. When he knelt down to the child's height, he could see up close the marks of life on the streets, the dirt encrusted under her small fingernails, the scratches on her skinny arms, the way she cowered slightly, as if expecting to be pushed away violently. "What's your name?" he asked gently, surprised at the gentleness in his voice. "I shine shoes near City Hall," replied the girl, avoiding the question about her name. "That's where your dad always goes, and I saw him with a woman. Many times, giving her money." The bride stepped forward, her high heels clicking on the marble. "This is ridiculous. A street child making up stories to—" "It's not a lie!" The girl opened the envelope with trembling fingers, revealing photographs that made the patriarch turn pale instantly. "They meet at the diner on the outskirts every Thursday. She always takes money from him, and then he gets very sad." The silence that followed was broken only by the scandalized murmurs of the guests. Women, covered in jewels, whispered behind expensive fans, while businessmen exchanged knowing glances. High society loved a scandal, especially when it involved as much wealth as this one. The millionaire took one of the photographs carefully. The image clearly showed his father handing an envelope to a middle-aged woman he did not recognize. The date on the back indicated that it had been taken just 2 weeks before. "Dad," he said, his voice laden with an authority he rarely used with the man who had raised him. "We need to talk." The bride tried to interpose, but the patriarch raised his trembling hand, silencing her. His eyes, once shining with the prospect of a new union, now seemed burdened with a weight that went far beyond his 91 years. "Where did you get these photos?" he asked the girl, his hoarse voice carrying decades of corporate authority. "I'm always there," she replied simply. "Nobody notices a kid who shines shoes, but I see everything." The ambitious college student took a few steps back, her mental calculations quickly readjusting the situation. Years of careful planning to conquer that fortune were crumbling before her eyes, sabotaged by a child who probably couldn't even read properly. "This is blackmail," she exclaimed, her mask of sweetness finally slipping. "Someone sent this girl here to destroy our happiness." But the millionaire was already helping the child to get up, noticing how she weighed almost nothing in his hands. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked, a genuine concern arising in his voice. The girl looked at him with eyes that seemed to carry too many experiences for her age. "Yesterday," she lied, when in fact it had been 3 days since her last proper meal. The patriarch watched the interaction between his son and the child with a mixture of guilt and fascination. All his wealth, all his power, all his million-dollar investments, and he was being confronted by someone who had probably never seen so much money together. "The wedding is suspended," he declared suddenly, his voice echoing through the luxurious chapel. The bride let out a cry of indignation that reverberated through the ornate walls, while the guests exploded in shocked murmurs. But the millionaire barely heard the commotion around him. He was completely focused on the brave child who had changed everything in a matter of minutes, not knowing that this moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would transform all their lives forever. 3 weeks had passed since the scandal in the chapel, and the mansion that once echoed only with the silence of empty corridors now housed an unexpected presence. The 4-year-old girl slept in one of the guest rooms, wrapped in silk sheets that cost more than many families spent in an entire year. The millionaire watched from the office window as she played in the garden, her still bare feet running across the impeccably manicured lawn. He had tried to buy her shoes, but the child refused to wear them, saying she couldn't feel the ground properly. It was one of the many strange habits she had developed during her months living on the streets. "She needs to go to a proper school," he said to the patriarch, who was sitting in his leather armchair, flipping through financial reports without really reading them. "She can't go on like this without a formal education." The 91-year-old man did not raise his eyes from the papers. Since the day of the cancelled wedding, he had become even more reclusive, communicating only through grunts and vague gestures. The shame of what had happened in the chapel consumed him like a silent cancer. "She's brought us enough trouble," he murmured finally. "I don't know why you insist on keeping her here." The millionaire clenched his fists, fighting against the irritation that grew inside him. For weeks he had tried to understand why he felt so much responsibility for that unknown child. Perhaps it was the courage she had shown, or the way her big eyes seemed to carry a wisdom impossible for her age. "She saved you from a terrible mistake," he replied, turning to face his father. "That woman only wanted your fortune." The photographs proved that. The investigations he had conducted in recent weeks revealed disturbing truths. The ambitious college student was not who she pretended to be. Her studies were paid for by an older man she had abandoned upon learning about the family's fortune. Even worse, she had tried to speed up the wedding because she was pregnant with another man's child. Outside, the girl had stopped playing and was staring intently at something at the mansion gate. The millionaire followed her gaze and saw a middle-aged woman standing on the other side of the ornate bars, the same woman from the photographs that had caused so much commotion. "She's here," he said, his voice tense. The patriarch finally raised his eyes, and the fear that crossed his face was unmistakable. "Don't let her in," he whispered, but his voice trembled in a way his son had never heard before. The millionaire ran down the stairs, reaching the garden as the girl walked determinedly towards the gate. Her small steps were firm, without hesitation, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. "Wait!" he called, but she didn't stop. The woman on the other side of the bars was thin and pale, wearing simple but clean clothes. When she saw the child approaching, her eyes filled with tears. There was something familiar in her face, something that the millionaire couldn't immediately identify. "You're the nurse," said the girl, her voice small but clear. "The one who took care of his wife." The woman nodded slowly, her hands gripping the bars tightly. "I am, dear. And you're very brave for doing what you did." The millionaire came closer, each step revealing more details of the stranger's face. There was something about her that awakened a distant memory, something connected to dark days he preferred to forget. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice laden with corporate authority. "Justice," replied the woman simply. "And maybe forgiveness." The girl extended her small hand through the bars, lightly touching the nurse's fingers. "You look sad," she said. "Like I get sometimes when I remember my mommy." It was then that the truth hit the millionaire like a punch in the stomach. The resemblance wasn't just in the face, it was in the eyes, in the delicate shape of the features, in the way they both tilted their heads slightly to the side when concentrated. "You knew her parents," he said. It wasn't a question. The nurse closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before answering. "I knew her mother very well. We were sisters." The revelation fell on them like a silent bomb. The girl looked at the woman with even bigger eyes, processing the information with the seriousness of someone much older. "You're my aunt?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "I am, my dear, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me." The millionaire felt the world spin around him. For weeks he had wondered about the origin of that child, about how she had survived alone on the streets, about why no one had come looking for her. Now everything was starting to make sense in a painful way. "Why were you blackmailing my father?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost gentle. The nurse looked at the imposing mansion behind him, her eyes scanning the luxurious windows and impeccable gardens. "Because he owed me something," she said. "When my sister passed away in the accident, she left a little girl. I asked him for help, I begged him. His wife had just passed away too, and I thought maybe he would understand the pain of losing someone dear. And he refused. Worse, he fired me and had security throw me off the property. Said he didn't want any children around reminding him of his own loss." The girl listened to every word with absolute attention, her little fingers still intertwined with her aunt's through the bars. The millionaire could see tears forming in her eyes, but she didn't cry. "So you decided to make him pay," he continued. "I started by just asking for help taking care of her. Small amounts for food, medicine when she got sick. But when he refused again, when he said an orphan child wasn't his problem," the nurse's voice broke, "I became bitter. I started demanding more money, threatening to tell everyone how the city's great philanthropist had abandoned a child in need." The millionaire looked at the girl, who was now watching him with an indecipherable expression. "Where was she all this time?" he asked. "With a family in the suburbs. Good people, but poor. I paid what I could with the money I got from your father, but it wasn't enough. 3 months ago, they moved to another state and—" The nurse couldn't finish the sentence. "And she was left alone on the streets," completed the millionaire, feeling an anger grow inside him. Not anger at the nurse, but at himself, at his father, at the whole situation that had led an innocent child to live in such terrible conditions. The girl let go of her aunt's hand and turned to him. "Are you mad at me?" she asked, her small voice laden with fear. The question completely surprised him. "Why would I be mad at you?" "Because I caused trouble. I always cause trouble." The millionaire knelt on the damp grass, soiling his thousands of dollars suit without caring. "You didn't cause trouble," he said, looking directly into the child's eyes. "You told the truth. And the truth is never a problem. At that moment, looking at that brave child who had faced a chapel full of powerful adults to protect someone she didn't even know properly, the millionaire made a decision that would change all his priorities forever. "Do you want to come in?" he asked the nurse, his hands already moving to open the gate. The woman hesitated, looking at the mansion as if it were a threatening castle. "I don't know if my father will have to accept it," he said firmly, "because some conversations need to happen, and some debts need to be paid." The mansion's living room had never witnessed such a tense meeting. The patriarch remained in his armchair, refusing to look directly at the nurse, who sat rigidly on the velvet sofa. The girl had positioned herself on the floor between the two adults, as if she instinctively knew that her role was to serve as a bridge between worlds that hated each other. "3 years," said the nurse, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. "3 years I took care of your wife in her final moments. I held her hand when the pain was unbearable. I sang to her when she couldn't sleep. And when she passed away, you treated me like garbage." The millionaire watched his father, waiting for some reaction, some sign of remorse or explanation. But the 91-year-old man just squeezed the arms of the armchair hard enough to make his knuckles turn white. "I was suffering," murmured the patriarch finally, his voice almost inaudible. "And I wasn't?" The nurse leaned forward, years of hurt exploding in her voice. "My sister had just passed away in a terrible accident, leaving a little girl. I had lost my job, taking care of your wife. I was broke, with no prospects, with a child depending on me." The girl played quietly with a piece of string she had found, but the millionaire noticed that she absorbed every word. Her ability to understand complex situations still surprised him. "You had enough wealth to help half the world," continued the nurse. "Investments that generated astronomical profits every month. Stocks that earned more interest in one day than I made in an entire year. And even so, I said no," completed the patriarch, finally finding the courage to look her in the eyes. "Because I was afraid." The confession surprised everyone in the room. The millionaire knew his father as a tough, pragmatic man who had built his fortune through firm and calculated decisions. He had never heard him admit to being afraid of anything. "Afraid of what?" asked the nurse, her anger momentarily replaced by curiosity. "That you were right," replied the patriarch, his voice trembling. "My wife always said I was selfish, that I only thought about money and business, said that on the last day of her life when she was delirious with fever. Called me a heartless man." The girl stopped playing and looked at the old man with an expression of understanding that seemed impossible for her age. "She was sick when she said that," she spoke softly. "Sick people sometimes say things they don't really mean." The patriarch stared at her with watery eyes. "How can you know that?" "Because my mummy also got very sick before she passed. She yelled at me once, said I was a bad girl. But later, when she was better, she apologized and explained that the pain made her say bad things." The silence that followed was different from the previous one, less tense, more reflective. The millionaire watched the subtle transformation in his father's face, as if the child's simple words had touched something that years of therapy and counseling had failed to achieve. "Even so," said the nurse, her voice softer now, "you fired me the day after the funeral. Without warning, without proper explanation, and when I came back asking for help for my niece." "I had security throw you out," admitted the patriarch, running a hand over his tired face, "because seeing you there, with that child in your arms, reminded me of everything I had lost, of how I had failed as a husband in recent years." The girl got up and walked to the patriarch's armchair. Without asking permission, she climbed onto the furniture and sat on his lap, something he would normally never allow. But this time, his trembling hands moved automatically to support her. "You're not a bad man," she said, looking directly into his eyes. "Bad people don't get sad when they do wrong things." The millionaire felt something tighten in his chest as he watched the scene. Throughout his life, he had struggled to get his father's approval and affection. Now, a 4-year-old child was achieving in minutes what he had never accomplished. "I need to tell you something," said the nurse, her voice hesitant, "about the last few months, about what really happened to her." All eyes turned to her, and the millionaire realized that there were more layers to this story than he had imagined. The family that took her in. They didn't move to another state, she continued, the words coming out with difficulty. They got scared. "Scared of what?" asked the millionaire, a bad feeling growing in his stomach. "I was desperate. The money I got from your father wasn't enough to pay for her care properly. I started drinking, showing up drunk at their house, yelling, making scenes. They thought I was becoming dangerous." The girl shifted uncomfortably in the patriarch's lap, but didn't say anything. Her small hands played with the gold buttons of his suit jacket. "One night I showed up there very intoxicated, demanding that they give her back to me. I said I was going to take her to a better place, but I was clearly drunk. The family was terrified, afraid that I would hurt the child unintentionally." The millionaire closed his eyes, imagining the scene. A small child witnessing adults yelling, arguing about her fate as if she were an object. "They fled during the night," continued the nurse, tears beginning to run down her face. "They left her sleeping in the backyard, with a note saying that they could no longer take care of her. When I woke up from my drunken stupor and went looking for them, the house was empty." "And you didn't go after her?" asked the patriarch, his voice laden with growing indignation. "I tried. I spent days searching, but it was as if they had disappeared off the map. When I finally found her weeks later, she was living under a bridge, eating scraps she found in the trash." The girl finally spoke, her voice small but clear. "You were very sick that day. You smelled like the man who lived near the bridge." The nurse sobbed. "I was drinking a lot, honey, a lot. I couldn't even stand up straight. You said you didn't want to go with me because I was scary." "She was right," said the patriarch suddenly, his voice stronger now. "A child shouldn't have to take care of an adult. It should be the other way around." The millionaire looked at his father in surprise. There was a renewed authority in his voice, as if the child's presence in his lap had awakened something dormant. "That's why you increased your demands," continued the patriarch, addressing the nurse. "It wasn't just greed, it was desperation." She nodded, unable to speak through the tears. "And that's why she decided to show up at my wedding," he concluded, looking at the girl, "because she knew that you weren't in a condition to take care of her, but she also knew that I was making a mistake." The girl looked at him with her big eyes. "I heard her talking on the phone with the pretty lady from the wedding. They were planning something bad for after you got married." The millionaire straightened up in his chair. "What kind of thing?" "The pretty lady said she was going to make you go away far away, and then she was going to make Grandpa sign papers. Auntie said that if that happened, she would never be able to get money to help me again." The revelation hit the millionaire like lightning. The ambitious college student wasn't just after his father's fortune. She was planning to separate him from his family completely, probably through some legal scheme that would give her total control over the assets. "That's why you went to the chapel," he said to the girl, understanding and admiration mixed in his voice. "Not just to save my father from a bad marriage, but to protect your aunt, too." The child nodded solemnly. "Auntie isn't bad. She just gets sick sometimes, like my mommy used to." The patriarch hugged the girl tightly, and for the first time in years, the millionaire saw genuine tears in his father's eyes. "I owe you an apology," said the old man, looking at the nurse. "A very big one." But before she could answer, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the mansion. The millionaire went to the window and felt the blood run cold in his veins. The ambitious college student was standing at the gate, accompanied by 2 men in dark suits and a woman with a briefcase. Her expression no longer showed any trace of the feigned sweetness she had used to win over the patriarch. "She's here," he said, his voice tense. "And she didn't come alone." The tension in the room increased drastically as the firm footsteps echoed through the mansion's marble hallway. The ambitious college student entered without ceremony, followed by the two men in suits and the woman with the briefcase. Her face, once always adorned with calculated smiles, now displayed a coldness that made the environment seem icy. "What a touching reunion," she said, her gaze sweeping over the scene with disdain. The decadent patriarch, the blackmailing nurse, and the street child. Sounds like the beginning of a tasteless joke. The girl huddled closer in the patriarch's lap, instinctively recognizing the danger in the woman's voice. The millionaire positioned himself protectively between her and the unwanted visitors. "You weren't invited in," he said, his voice laden with corporate authority. "Oh, but I have rights here," replied the ex-fiancé, gesturing to the woman with the briefcase. "Rights that you're going to discover very soon." The woman opened the briefcase and withdrew official documents. "I'm Mrs. Lawyer. We're here to notify you of a lawsuit for damages arising from the abrupt cancellation of the wedding." The patriarch tried to get up, but the girl in his lap made him hesitate. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Ridiculous." The ex-fiancé laughed bitterly. "I abandoned my studies, invested time and resources planning our life together. My reputation was publicly ruined in that chapel. That comes at a price." One of the men in suits stepped forward, revealing a professional camera. "We're also documenting the inadequate conditions in which this child is being kept here," he said in a monotonous voice. The nurse stood up abruptly. "She's in perfect condition. Better than she's ever been. A child without proper documentation, without established legal guardianship, living with people who aren't relatives," listed the lawyer coldly. "That's enough to trigger Child Protective Services." The millionaire felt a chill down his spine. "What do you really want?" The ex-fiancée smiled, but there was no warmth in her expression. "Justice and compensation for the damages caused by this charade you've created." "What charade?" asked the patriarch, his voice trembling with contained rage. "Please," she said, gesturing theatrically, "an abandoned child magically appears with compromising photographs, all timed perfectly for the wedding day? You orchestrated all of this to avoid commitment." The girl hid her face in the patriarch's chest, but her small voice managed to cut through the tension. "I didn't lie. I saw everything with my own eyes." "Of course you did," said the ex-fiancé with venomous sarcasm, "after they taught you exactly what to say and do." The millionaire stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You're accusing a 4-year-old child of conspiracy." "I'm accusing a family of using a vulnerable child for their own interests," replied the lawyer. "And we have evidence to prove it." She removed from the briefcase a series of photographs that made everyone in the room fall silent. The images showed the millionaire talking to the nurse in different locations in the city during the past few weeks. "You've known each other for a long time," said the ex-fiancé triumphantly. "These meetings weren't casual. You planned everything." The nurse turned pale. "That's not true. I had never spoken to him before the day of the wedding." "Liar," said one of the men in suits, consulting a notepad. "We have records of wire transfers from his company to your account in the last 2 months. The millionaire felt the world spin around him. "What transfers? I never authorized any payment to her." The lawyer smiled with satisfaction. "Maybe you should better check the activities of your own company. Or maybe you forgot to mention a few details to your family." The patriarch looked at his son with an expression of growing confusion and distrust. "What are they talking about?" "I don't know," replied the millionaire, genuinely perplexed. "I never made any transfer." "We checked the bank records," interrupted the lawyer. 5 transfers of $10,000 each, all authorized electronically from your company office." The girl shifted uneasily in the patriarch's lap, her big eyes watching every adult in the room. "The man who took the pictures," she said suddenly, her voice almost a whisper. Everyone turned to her. "What man?" asked the millionaire, kneeling down to the child's height. "There's a man who's always nearby when bad things happen. He was at the diner when Auntie met Grandpa." He was on the street when I lived under the bridge, and he was at the chapel on the wedding day. The ex-fiancé exchanged a quick look with one of the men in suits, a movement almost imperceptible that the millionaire caught. "You know this man," he said, pointing to her. "You're working together." "That's absurd," she replied, but there was a note of nervousness in her voice. The girl got down from the patriarch's lap and walked to the window, pointing to the street. "He's there." "It's that man there." Everyone approached the window. Across the street, partially hidden behind a tree, a man with a long-range camera was watching the mansion. "Son of a bitch," murmured the millionaire, understanding finally dawning. "You've been documenting everything for weeks. You set up this whole frame job." The lawyer tried to maintain her composure. "That doesn't prove anything. We have the right to gather evidence for our legal action." "Evidence or blackmail?" asked the patriarch, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. The nurse stepped forward, her expression changing from confused to furious. "The transfers, you hacked into his company, didn't you?" One of the men in suits finally spoke. "We have contacts who can access banking systems. It's easier to create evidence when you have the right tools." The confession came out before he could control himself, and the ex-fiancé glared at him. "So you fabricated evidence," said the millionaire, taking his cell phone out of his pocket. "That's a federal crime." "Prove it," challenged the ex-fiancée, but her confidence was clearly shaken. The girl returned to the patriarch, but this time stood next to his armchair. "Auntie," she said to the nurse, "tell them about what you saw at the diner." The nurse frowned, concentrating. "There was always a man at the tables nearby when I met with him. I thought it was coincidence, but—" She looked through the window at the man with the camera. "It was him. It was always him." "And on the day of the chapel?" asked the millionaire. "He was at the back of the church," said the girl with absolute certainty. "He took a lot of pictures when I ran in." The ex-fiancé tried one last card. "Even if that were true, there's still the issue of this child's inadequate custody. She needs professional care, not your dubious charity." It was then that the patriarch stood up, his presence dominating the room as in the old days. "Dubious charity?" he repeated, his voice laden with decades of authority. "This child saved my family from a gold digger and made me realize mistakes I've carried for years." He walked to the table and picked up a gold pen. "My lawyer will be here in an hour to start the legal adoption papers. This girl won't need charity because she's going to be officially my granddaughter." The statement hit everyone in the room like lightning. The ex-fiancée turned pale, realizing that her last leverage had disappeared. "Furthermore," continued the patriarch, "I'm allocating $5 million from my estate to an educational fund in her name, and another $5 million for her aunt to rehabilitate herself and rebuild her life properly." The millionaire looked at his father with a mixture of shock and admiration. He had never seen the man make such important decisions so decisively. "As for you," said the patriarch, addressing the ex-fiancée, "I suggest you leave my property before I decide to sue for trespassing, forging documents, and attempted blackmail." The woman tried one more time. "This isn't over. We have rights." "You don't have any rights," interrupted the girl, her voice small but firm. "You're bad people who hurt other people, and bad people don't win in the end." The simplicity and conviction in her words echoed through the room. The ex-fiancée looked around, realizing that she had completely lost control of the situation. 15 minutes later, she and her accomplices had left the mansion, defeated and humiliated. The room fell silent for a moment, everyone processing what had happened. "Grandpa," said the girl, climbing back into the patriarch's lap, "are you really going to be my real grandpa?" The 91-year-old man hugged the brave child who had changed his life forever. "If you want to, my dear." "If you want to?" The nurse approached timidly. I don't know how to thank you. I'll use the money to get treatment, I promise. I want to be the aunt she deserves." The millionaire watched the scene with a full heart. For the first time in years, His family was truly united, and all thanks to a 4-year-old girl who had been brave enough to shout the truth in a chapel full of lies. "Well," he said, smiling genuinely for the first time in months, "I guess we have adoption papers to take care of and a new life to begin." The girl smiled back, her big eyes shining with a happiness that seemed to illuminate the entire mansion. Finally, after so much suffering and loneliness, she had found a family that would love her unconditionally. And they, in turn, had found the missing piece to complete their hearts. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos that will make your life happier every day. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.